You did everything they told you to do. Degree, job, savings account. You played the game correctly, and the house is still out of reach. Not by a little, not temporarily, but structurally, permanently, by design. This is not a market problem. Markets do not write zoning laws. Markets do not protect $500,000 in tax-free profit for homeowners while taxing your salary at full rate. People wrote those rules. People who owned homes. People who needed the price to keep rising. And they built a political coalition large enough to make sure no government ever changed them. This is the Wealth Files. Have you given up on owning a home, or are you still trying? Drop your answer below. In 1970, the average American home cost 3 times the average annual income. Today that number is 8. That gap did not open by accident. It was built by zoning laws, by tax codes, by institutional money, and by a political class that depends on the votes of the people who already own. There are 5 mechanisms. Each one was a choice. Each one has a beneficiary, and none of them is you. The first mechanism is zoning, and it is older and uglier than most people know. Single-family zoning covers approximately 75% of residential land in most American cities. It means 1 house per plot, no apartments, no density, no new supply. The direct result is that cities with the most jobs have the least housing, and prices climb until only the already wealthy can enter. Zoning laws of this type first appeared in the 1920s. Their original purpose was not aesthetic. They were used to enforce racial segregation, to keep black families out of white neighborhoods without explicitly saying so. The legal architecture that excluded an entire generation from ownership by race is the same legal architecture now excluding an entire generation by income. Nobody dismantled it, because the people who benefited from restricted supply, existing homeowners, sat on planning committees, showed up to council meetings, and voted in local elections at rates renters never matched. Houston, Texas has no citywide zoning laws. It is one of the most affordable major cities in America. That is not a coincidence. It is a controlled experiment that the rest of the country has chosen to ignore. The second mechanism arrived after 2008, and it changed who competes against you. When the financial crisis hit, millions of American families lost their homes to foreclosure. Those homes did not go back to families. They went to corporations. Blackstone, Invitation Homes, American Homes 4, Rent, entered the single-family housing market at scale, purchasing distressed properties at cents on the dollar, often using government-backed financing from the same institutions that had just bailed out the banks. Invitation Homes today owns over 80,000 single-family houses across the United States. They are not buying to live in them. They are buying to own the asset permanently and extract rent indefinitely. The house that a family loses to foreclosure becomes the house that same family rents back from a corporation at a margin. Meet Sarah and James, teachers in Atlanta. Combined income, $95,000. Between 2022 and 2023, they made offers on 4 homes. They lost every single one. Each time, the winning bid was all cash. Each time, the buyer was a company. Sarah and James were not outbid by a wealthier family. They were outbid by an algorithm and a balance sheet. The third mechanism is the mortgage system itself, which was never designed to help you buy a home. The 30-year fixed-rate mortgage was invented in 1934 as an emergency measure to stop the banking system from collapsing during the Great Depression. It was a crisis tool. It became permanent because the financial industry built a trillion-dollar infrastructure around it, and the political class had no incentive to change it. When the Federal Reserve dropped interest rates to near zero after 2008 and again in 2020, housing did not become more affordable. It became more expensive. Cheap money flooded a market with restricted supply. Prices exploded. The people who already owned saw their net worth double. The people trying to enter the market found the floor had risen above them. Then rates rose to 7% in 2023. The market should have corrected. It did not. Existing homeowners refused to sell and give up their 3% mortgages. Supply froze. Prices held. The people who owned were protected in both directions, by cheap money when rates were low, and by their own inertia when rates rose. The people trying to buy were exposed in both directions. That is not a market. That is a trapdoor. The fourth mechanism is the tax code. which transfers wealth from the young to the old every single year, invisibly, legally, and by design. In the United States, a married couple can sell their primary residence and pocket up to $500,000 in profit completely tax-free. Earn that same amount at work and you pay income tax. Earn it by sitting in a house for 10 years and you pay nothing. The mortgage interest deduction allows homeowners to reduce their taxable income by the cost of their borrowing, a subsidy that disproportionately benefits people with larger mortgages and higher incomes, not the first-time buyers struggling to afford a starter home. In the United Kingdom, Help to Buy was a government scheme explicitly designed to support first-time buyers. Independent analysis consistently showed it did one thing well: it inflated prices in the areas where it was used, transferring the subsidy from buyers directly to developers and existing homeowners. The government knew this. It ran the scheme for a decade. Every policy sold as help for buyers has ultimately added demand without adding supply. Higher prices. Same winners. The fifth mechanism is the one nobody wants to say out loud, because it means the problem is not getting better. It is getting more permanent. Homeownership is becoming hereditary. As the generation that bought cheaply dies, their properties do not return to the market at accessible prices. They transfer to their children, who already own or who use the inheritance to outcompete first-time buyers with cash. Or the properties are liquidated to fund nursing home costs and never reach the next generation at all. Either way, the asset does not circulate. It concentrates. The result is a market no longer divided between those who earn more and those who earn less, but between those who were born into property and those who are not. You can earn $120,000 a year in a major city and still be priced out, while someone earning half that buys easily. Because they inherited a deposit from parents who bought in 1991, the market is not rewarding work. It is rewarding inheritance. None of this is market forces. Markets do not zone. Markets do not write tax codes. Markets do not decide which neighborhoods get density and which stay frozen. Markets do not fund billion-dollar institutional landlords with government-backed credit. People made these decisions. Specifically, people who owned homes, who managed corporations, who wrote tax codes, who sat on planning committees. They made decisions that preserved and inflated the value of what they already held. The documentation is public. The votes are on record. The lobbying disclosures are filed. You are not priced out because of bad luck or poor timing. You are priced out because the people who got in before you built a system designed to keep the price rising, and built a political coalition large enough to make sure no government ever dismantled it. Owning a home used to be the floor, the minimum condition of financial stability a working person could expect to reach. It is now a ceiling, separating those who inherited access from those who did not. That gap will not close on its own. It was opened deliberately, and the people who opened it are still voting to keep it that way. If this changed how you see the housing market, the next video goes further. What happens to an entire country when a generation stops being able to build wealth at all? Hit subscribe. This is the Wealth Files.